What kind of woman opens her door after midnight on the edge of the wild Dakota plains, knowing a single mistake could mean death? Katherine Havford did, and that one choice would change the fate of thousands. The wind swept across Grayton's Gulch with a restless hunger that night. It carried dust, dry grass, and the lonely howl of a land still healing from old battles. In 1877, the frontier was a tightrope between peace and danger. Folks in town often whispered that nothing good ever came from a stranger's knock after dark. But Katherine had lived through too many nights alone in her small log cabin to ignore a cry for help. She had been a widow for nearly a year. At 26, her dark brown hair tied in a single braid, she was strong because life had given her no choice. Her husband, John Havford, had been a dreamer who tried to tame the plains. When illness swept through the territory the previous winter, it claimed him, along with half the town. Katherine stayed. She held the ranch together with her bare hands, her grit, and a stubborn heart that refused to break. That night, just past midnight, she heard it. A scraping sound, then a soft, uneven thud on her front door. Her breath froze in her chest. She reached for John's old rifle and moved barefoot across the rough floorboards. The wind hissed around the cabin like a warning spirit as she lifted the bar and opened the door a crack. A wounded Lakota man stood swaying on her doorstep. He was tall, his dark hair sticking to his face, his chest rising with sharp, painful breaths. A deep red stain spread across the side of his buckskin shirt. Blood dripped steadily, leaving a trail behind him. His eyes, dark, intense, clouded with pain, met hers with a quiet plea. "Help," he rasped. The word was not English, but she understood. Katherine did not think about danger or gossip or the threats from men like Russell Kane, the rancher who insisted no woman should live alone. She saw a human being on the edge of death. Instinct moved her faster than fear. She opened the door wider and reached out to steady him. Inside the cabin, he collapsed into John's old armchair. Katherine's heart pounded, but her hands moved with purpose. She had tended to her husband through months of sickness and learned what herbs, bandages, and whiskey could do. She fetched her small sewing kit, hot water, and the bottle of whiskey John had once used for pain. When she cut away the man's shirt, her breath caught. A bullet wound close to the ribs, swollen and angry. Infection would come fast if she didn't work quickly. She pressed a whiskey-soaked cloth to the wound. He flinched hard, gripping the chair until his knuckles whitened. Katherine whispered soft, calming sounds the way her mother used to. The sound wasn't a word, just a warm hush that floated through the room. Under the lamplight, she noticed faint symbols tattooed along his forearms, scars across his chest, marks that told the story of battles, honor, and survival. Whoever this man was, he had lived through more than most men ever would. When she cleaned the wound, she spoke softly, even though she doubted he understood. "I'm Katherine. You're safe here." He blinked slowly, sweat shining on his brow. After a long moment, he whispered something like "Toka," but the rest of the word faded into a pained groan. She tried again. "Tokasha?" This time he nodded. By dawn, he slipped into a fitful sleep. Katherine sat nearby, exhausted, staring at him in the soft, gray morning light. She had done what she could. Now she worried what it would cost her. There were rumors of Lakota warriors regrouping. Some settlers said they were dangerous. Others said they were only protecting what was theirs. The cavalry had passed through just days ago, looking uneasy and restless. If anyone discovered she had taken in a wounded Lakota man, she might be branded a traitor. But Katherine refused to regret helping him. She was not the kind of woman who could leave someone to die on her doorstep. When Tokasha woke, the cabin glowed with morning sunlight. Pain shadowed his face, but he was alert. He looked around with guarded eyes. Katherine offered him water. He took it carefully, trying to understand where he was and why she had helped him. She pointed to herself. Katherine pointed to him. "Tokasha?" Quote. He nodded again, slower this time, as if trusting her bit by bit. Throughout the afternoon, she taught him simple English words, using a scrap of newspaper and a pencil. He wrote a small symbol, a turtle, below his name. She didn't know what it meant, but she sensed it mattered. Just before sunset, hooves thundered in the distance. Catherine's blood ran cold. A rider approached. She rushed to the window. Russell Kane, the rancher whose suspicious eyes never missed anything, rode toward her cabin. She signaled Tokasha to stay silent and closed the door behind her as she stepped outside. Kane reined in his horse. "Morning, Mrs. Havford," he said, his tone edged with curiosity. "Everything all right out here?" Katherine forced a calm smile. "Just tending my ranch." "You seen anything unusual? Cavalry says there might be Lakota stragglers nearby." Her heart hammered. She shook her head. "Nothing here." Kane studied her face, her cabin door, the tracks in the dirt. Too long, too hard. Finally he grunted and rode on. Katherine waited until he was a distant speck before rushing inside. Tokasha was still there, tense but silent. "You stay hidden," she whispered. "This land is not kind to strangers." He nodded, understanding more than she expected. As night settled over the plains, Katherine cleaned his bandage again. His fever eased, but his eyes held a depth she couldn't explain. A quiet strength, a heavy secret. She wondered what kind of man had come to her door. She had no idea he was more than just a wounded stranger. No idea the cavalry hunted him. No idea he was a leader, maybe even a chief. All she knew was this. Her life, once quiet and lonely, had shifted forever. A storm was coming to Grayton's Gulch, and Tokasha was at the heart of it. What if the man she saved was not only hunted, but the very reason soldiers were sweeping the plains? Katherine didn't know it yet, but the truth would soon surround her homestead like a tightening noose. By the next morning, Tokasha's fever had dropped. His wound was healing, though each breath still pained him. He could sit up without trembling. Katherine watched him quietly as she prepared a simple breakfast of beans and leftover biscuits. The cabin felt different now, no longer silent, no longer empty. Every time she turned, she saw him watching her with steady, calm eyes that held stories she could not yet imagine. She brought him a tin plate. He nodded. "Thank you," he said slowly. She noticed how careful he was with the word, how he shaped it with respect. She smiled softly and sat across from him. He ate small bites, tired but grateful. Outside, the plains stretched wide and restless. The wind carried a strange energy. The livestock were uneasy. Even the hens clucked nervously. "Something is coming," Katherine whispered to herself. Tokasha seemed to sense it too. He placed one hand on his chest and then gestured toward the northern horizon, trying to explain. She fetched the dictionary again and laid it on the table. Sitting beside him, she flipped through until she found words like danger, soldiers, tribe, family. He pointed to danger, then to soldiers. Then he rested his hand on his wound. Katherine understood. "They shot you," she said softly. He nodded once. "Forsythe," he said, sharp with bitterness. The name chilled her. Colonel Forsythe had ordered aggressive patrols around Grayton's Gulch. If he'd shot Tokasha, he would hunt him again. That meant cavalry could return any moment. Katherine's breath caught. "You're not safe here," she whispered. But Tokasha only shook his head. "I go soon," he said. His English was improving, each word more stable than the night before. Before she could respond, the sound of hooves thundered across the plains. Her heart jumped. Tokasha tensed instantly. Katherine rushed to the window. This time, it wasn't Russell Kane. It was Colonel Forsythe himself. He rode toward the ranch with 3 soldiers at his side, rifles strapped to their saddles. Katherine's pulse roared in her ears. She grabbed Token's arm and pointed beneath the bed. "Hide, now!" He moved quickly, despite the pain. She threw a blanket over the space, then stepped outside before the soldiers could reach her door. Forsythe dismounted, boots hitting the ground with a heavy thud. His sharp eyes swept the ranch with a cold hunger. "Mrs. Havford," he said, "we're looking for a wounded Lakota man. You seen anything unusual?" Katherine forced a calm breath. "No, sir, I've been here alone." Forsythe stepped closer. "This man is dangerous, a renegade. He has already attacked my men." Katherine swallowed hard. "I haven't seen anyone." A soldier shifted in his saddle. "We found tracks near the stream. He's close. Forsythe's gaze dropped to her boots, still speckled with dust from morning chores, then to the cabin door. "May we take a look inside?" he asked. Her throat tightened. She kept her voice steady. "There's nothing here but my things." Forsythe studied her face. Katherine feared her hammering heartbeat would give her away. Then, after a tense moment, he mounted his horse. "If you see anything, tell us," he said. "Sheltering an outlaw is a crime." They rode away slowly, scanning the horizon. Only after their silhouettes vanished did Katherine dash into the cabin. She dropped to her knees and lifted the blanket. Tokasha lay there sweating, breath shallow from holding still. "They're gone," she whispered. He crawled out, grimacing. Katherine helped him to the chair. His hand brushed hers, warm, grateful, trembling. "You saved me," he said quietly. She shook her head. "No, you're the one in danger." Tokasha stared at her for a long moment. Then he spoke slowly, carefully. "I must leave soon. My people need me." Katherine felt her heart twist. She knew he couldn't stay forever, but hearing it aloud hurt more than she expected. "Are you strong enough?" she asked. He nodded. "Soon." For the next 2 days, Katherine kept him hidden, while tension in the town worsened. Men gathered at the saloon, ranting about Lakota warriors regrouping. Rumors spread that a young chief was leading them. Some said he commanded hundreds, others said 1,000. Katherine kept her head low and gathered supplies quietly. One afternoon, when she was in town buying dried beans, Russell Kane cornered her outside the general store. "You seen any Indians around your land?" "No," she replied sharply. He smirked. "Funny. Folks say your ranch has been real busy. Doors shut, curtains drawn. Looks suspicious to me." Fear crawled up her spine. She turned away before he could press her. When she returned home, Tokasha was waiting by the window. His breathing was firmer, his posture straighter. His wound had sealed enough for him to move. He watched her enter, then said softly, "I go tonight?" The words hit like a blow. "Tonight?" she whispered. He stepped closer. His dark eyes held gratitude, and something deeper, something that made her chest tighten. "You help me," he said, pressing a hand gently to her arm. "I not forget." She swallowed a knot of emotion. "Let me get you supplies." They worked in silence as evening settled over the plains. Katherine packed food, water, fresh bandages, and John's old hunting knife. When she handed it to Tokasha, their fingers brushed again. This time, neither pulled away. Moonlight spilled through the window as Tokasha slung the pack over his shoulder. He paused at the doorway. "Katherine," he said softly. Her breath caught. He lifted his hand, brushing his fingers gently across her cheek. A soft, warm touch she hadn't felt since her husband died. Her eyes stung. "Thank you," he said. She whispered, "Please stay safe." With one last lingering look, Chief Tokasha stepped into the night, a lone warrior carrying a destiny she could not yet imagine. Katherine stood at the door long after he disappeared, her heart heavy and hopeful. She felt their connection like a living thread stretching across the dark plains. She had no idea the storm he was riding into, and no idea he would return. But when he did, the entire Dakota Territory would tremble. What happens when a woman's act of kindness collides with the fury of an entire frontier? Katherine was about to learn. The storm she feared was no longer far away. It was at her doorstep. 3 days passed after Tokasha slipped into the night, days filled with worry, silence, and the constant fear that soldiers, or worse, would return. Katherine worked the ranch as best she could, though her thoughts never left the direction he had gone. Every sunrise carried hope he had reached his people. Every sunset carried dread he had not. That week, the land itself felt uneasy. The hens clucked at shadows. The cow kicked at nothing. The wind blew sharp and restless, carrying no warmth. Katherine sensed the tension building across the plains like a held breath. Her fear proved right when a cavalry scout came racing up the road, dust flying behind him. She stepped onto the porch, her heart thudding. "Ma'am," he called, breathless. "You seen a Lakota man around here?" About yay tall, wounded, maybe dragging a leg. Colonel Forsyth says he's close. Katherine steadied her voice. I haven't seen anyone. The scout stared at her cabin with suspicion, then he dismounted and marched toward her barn. We're searching the area, he said. She forced herself to stay calm as he checked every corner of her land. With every second, her heart beat louder. If Tokasha had stayed one more night, they would have dragged him out in chains. After what felt like the longest 10 minutes of her life, the scout mounted again. If you're lying, he warned, it won't go well for you. He rode off. Katherine's knees weakened with relief, but it didn't last. Because by nightfall, word spread through town. Lakota warriors had been spotted. Dozens at first. Then hundreds. Rumor claimed 1,000. Under the flicker of lanterns in Grayton's Gulch, men whispered in fear. They say the chief is young. They say he escaped the cavalry. They say he's coming this way. Katherine knew the truth deep in her bones. Tokasha was alive, and he was leading them. 2 days later, the war arrived. It began at dawn. A distant rumble that shook the air like thunder. But it wasn't thunder. It was gunfire. Katherine climbed onto the barn roof with her late husband's spyglass. Far out on the plains, dust rose in great swirling clouds. Tiny figures on horseback, weaving, charging, scattering. The cavalry and the Lakota had clashed. Her heart clenched when she spotted a rider at the front, a tall figure with long dark hair, moving with fierce determination. Tokasha. He was outnumbered, but his warriors moved with purpose. They signaled one another, split into flanks, regrouped with practiced ease. The plains erupted into chaos as soldiers fired and warriors circled back. Smoke drifted across the grassland like a ghostly curtain. The fighting pushed closer, too close. Katherine scrambled down just as bullets cracked in the distance. Lakota riders galloped past her ranch. Cavalry rode after them, shouting orders. Gunshots echoed. Her cow bawled in terror. Chickens scattered. Then she saw him. Tokasha's horse stumbled, struck by a soldier's bullet. Tokasha fell hard onto the dirt, rolling to a stop near her fence. No! Katherine gasped. Without thinking, she ran. Stop! She screamed at the charging soldiers. Colonel Forsyth was among them, rifle raised. Stand back, Mrs. Havford, he barked. That man is mine. Tokasha struggled to rise, pain twisting his face. Lakota warriors circled him, protecting him. The cavalry formed a line behind Forsyth, rifles ready. The air burned with tension. One wrong move would spark a massacre right on her land. Put your weapons down, Katherine cried, placing herself between Forsyth and Tokasha. You're out of your mind, Forsyth shouted. He's a renegade chief leading attacks on my men. Tokasha lifted a weak hand, signaling his warriors to hold. His chest rose with labored breaths. Blood streaked down one arm from the fall. Their eyes met. Katherine saw the truth in his expression. He wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting for his people's survival. Hoofbeats thundered again. Marshal Henry R. Thompson rode in fast from the south, shouting, "Hold your fire!" He reined in his horse between both sides. Forsyth, enough. We settle this without more killing. Forsyth's eyes burned with rage. I will not stand down. He's responsible for raids. Tokasha spoke through heavy breaths. My people protect our land. You invade. Forsyth snarled. You lie. Katherine stepped forward, voice steady and strong. You want to talk about lies, Colonel? How many treaties have been broken? How many promises made and forgotten? Forsyth stiffened. Katherine pulled John's old Union Army pendant from her pocket. She had grabbed it without thinking, but now she held it out like armor. My husband fought for honor, she said. If the Army breaks its word, it dishonors every man who wore that uniform. Soldiers shifted uneasily. Tokasha's warriors watched her with quiet respect. Marshal Thompson seized the moment. Let them leave, Forsyth. They're retreating, not attacking. Don't turn this land into a graveyard. Silence stretched. Forsyth glared, jaw tight. Then he spat into the dirt. Fine, they leave, But if I see them again, it's war." Tokasha straightened weakly. "We remember," he said. One of his warriors brought him a spare horse. With effort, Tokasha mounted. His eyes found Katherine again. Soft, grateful, heavy, with the weight of everything unsaid. He reached down, extending his hand. She stepped forward and took it. Their fingers tightened around each other, a silent promise carried in the wind. "You saved me," he said. Twice. Emotion burned behind her eyes. "Go, lead your people." He nodded once. A warrior's nod. A chief's nod. Then he rode north, his warriors following like a river of motion across the plains. Marshal Thompson escorted from a distance. Forsyth gathered his men and rode away without a word. And then, silence. The plains were empty again, but Katherine's heart was not. Days passed. The townsfolk repaired buildings and fences damaged in the skirmish. Some whispered that Mrs. Havford had stood between two armies. Some said she was fearless. Some said she was foolish. She ignored them all. At sunset one evening, while tending her garden, she found something half buried in the soil. A stone arrowhead. The edges smooth from years of wind. Her breath caught. Carefully, she picked it up and held it close. She didn't know if Tokasha had left it, or if the land itself offered it to her. Either way, she smiled. She was no longer just a widow, no longer just a rancher. She was a woman who had changed a destiny. And somewhere beyond the rolling horizon, a Lakota chief carried her memory with him. Their worlds were different, their paths uncertain. But the bond between them lived on, carried by the same wind that swept over the plains, the same wind that had brought him to her door.